Thanks for having me here. So I'm so happy to have all the experts here. So I'm a quite new guy to this area, so please just give me any comments you have. I know Albert and my discussants have already a lot of bullets, so please just pause me and fire. My name is Gewei Wang. I'm from Chinese University of Hong Kong. So my co-authors are Yi Huang from Graduate Institute in Switzerland and Percussion in IMF. So a little bit about the motivation still. So here's one article I take from a newspaper. So it says just like when the Shenzhen with the highest minimum wage in China, so it raises the minimum wage in 2012 by like 16%. And the following statement was raised by a deputy chairman who was from kind of Association of Hong Kong Industries, speaking on behalf of Hong Kong and Hong Kong businessmen who worked at Shenzhen. So it seems like the rise in the minimum wage could deteriorate from performance. And then, because if a firm cannot do good, so it will harm its employment. And we know, so like China, so started to build a harmonious society. So this is kind of some jargon used by our former president, and also priority is jobs. This has been used a lot, especially you can hear that from our prime minister. So this kind of seems like a trade-off, like so social equity and employment. So that's definitely a big thing. So I will not cover this minimum wage policy a lot because a lot of experts, Professor Lee and Carl, has already discussed that. So let me just focus on kind of 2004, this kind of enforcement tightening, right? So it has a couple of things going on at that time. So it extends its coverage from essentially previously state firms and other firms in urban areas. So now it extends to town, village enterprises and self-employed business. And also it includes hourly minimum wages. The third, that's very important, so it raises the penalty. Because there is no such thing to quantify how government should set the intensity of enforcement. So here, the rule only requires about the penalty. So here it raises by 5 times at that time. Also, the adjustment needs to be more frequent, so at least once every 2 years. So we're gonna, in this paper, we're gonna focus on this a lot, try to see whether before this time and after this time, so the effect of the minimum wage changed a lot or not. The empirical literature, so I think most of you have known this. So basically from developed countries, the evidence is still mixed. From China, so I think basically, so I just have very brief review, and we have some basic evidence from aggregate employment at the regional level. So it has the minimum wage policy has kind of a negative effect, but not generally negative. For example, in Carl's paper, so I think they haven't found the effect on male employment. So mainly it's just the effect lies on females if the result still remains there. All right. So about this paper, this paper is trying to estimate the effect of the minimum wage on firm employment. And here, the first thing, so that's same. So we kind of use same source of the data of minimum wages. It's at county level. And also we just take advantage of this county level minimum wages. So we try to explore geographic proximity because for counties, in China, counties is kind of has a size ranging from 20 to 2,000 square kilometers. So basically, it's the size of Hong Kong sort of thing. So because of this small size, so you can think of two neighbor counties can have a lot of similar characteristics. The third thing is, okay, so we're gonna look at the firm level employment. So this can give us extra benefit, so we can discuss later. So, and the second the fourth thing is, okay, so we're gonna try to examine the heterogeneous effect. So like different firms may respond to the minimum wage hike differently. Okay, so the second thing is just about the 2004 reform in the minimum wages. So here are some basic results we have. First, so for the post-enforcement tightening period from 2005 to 2007, the average elasticity here we estimated is negative 0.1. So it's sort of big, like in the common range just introduced just by Davis. So it's right. So it's like 10% rise in the minimum wage will lead to a 1% decline in employment. So that's a big.
Some low skill group.
Oh, so here we just so this result is for all the firms. So taken.
That's not a compliment.
So that's large actually, because this I will just let you know our sample a little bit later. And here, so let's look at the pre-tightening period from 2000 to 2004. This time, the average elasticity of the minimum wage is a little bit positive, but not significant at all. So there's a huge difference between the pre-tightening period and the post-tightening period. But the result, so we have tried a little bit more, and we have found that so this kind of negative result just happened like from 2005, not exactly in 2004, but so this kind of reform was enacted in March, so it's hard to know whether it should start from 2004 to 2005. And then here for heterogeneous response, we have found that basically we focus on wage groups, and we found that the firms with higher wage respond to the minimum wage hike less negatively. It's like more positively, but still negative, but much smaller in magnitude than this number. And this also is true before and after enforcement tightening. So for example, for this number, so of course the firms with higher wage will have a higher elasticity than this number. We also tried to use continuous interaction terms and try to see if different firms respond to the minimum wage policy differently. And here we use the continuous variable of firm wage. So here it shows a quite large difference before and after this tightening. And but the profit margin just means a firm with higher profit margin respond to the minimum wage hike more positively, and the elasticity is very large. And here, so because Professor Lee has already discussed this, I'm gonna just quickly go over this. So here it's a little bit weird because at the country level, so you can see such a kind of U curve. But here at the city level, actually I haven't found. So for like this city, so here we rank so the total city number is 335, and we pick some top minimum wage cities and the minimum wage cities and the bottom minimum wage cities. So those cities are ranked by their minimum wages in 2010. Here you can see, basically we haven't found any U-shape for a lot of cities, but just for some little bit cities just happening. This kind of trial just happened around 2008 something, right? So it's just the Great Recession period. And the basic message is that so we have a kind of large variation across regions, also across time, right? So because sometimes some counties simply did not adjust, so we're going to see up and down for those ratios of minimum wage to city average wage.
Where is Yichun?
Yichun, right? Yichun, I think should be those are cities, prefecture cities.
Oh, but what province is it in?
Sichuan, right? And here Jiangxi, and they are quite close, basically. I think it's Yichun, Jiangxi. What? Yichun? So are you talking about Yichun?
Yeah, I mean it's not from Sichuan province.
黑龙江
also is the Heilongjiang province.
There's another one? You mean?
What's the name of this?
宜春，一个叫春的城市 right? A city which is named after spring. Okay, so they are kind of neighbor cities. They're kind of neighbor cities. Those three. Those three are kind of new. You know those are Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Shenzhen. Okay, so and our data also gives us advantage to look at the relative minimum wage, which is defined by the ratio of city minimum wage to a firm average wage. So here is the city average from employee wage. You can see it's actually kind of flatter than the previous slide which shows. So it just means actually firm average tracks the minimum wage better than the city average wage. This is a very interesting thing. And another phenomenon is that, so this kind of enforcement tightening did not change the level of minimum wage adjustment. So you can think, okay, so it improves the intensity, it increases the intensity of enforcement, but it will not just lead the government to adjust aggressively in the minimum wage level. Okay, so this is a basically empirical statistics. So here we're gonna follow this roadmap, data framework, findings, and then a little bit robustness check. And here the data, just kind of same source. So it's at county level. And we use, because our firm data is annual level, so we just sum up all the monthly minimum wages together, so we have kind of annual minimum wage. So we're gonna use that. Sometimes we use monthly average minimum wage, but if we take logs, that's basically same. And then we have some macroeconomic data. They are all from city levels because it's very hard for us to find a panel data of macroeconomic variables at this county level. Here, the firm data has been used extensively in the research on TFP in China, also export FDI, those kind of things. But this study is the first study which combine this data with the minimum wage policy. So this data, how representative is it? And this data only covers industrial firms. So from the 2004 census, we can compare this survey to the census. And you can see it covers more than 90% of total output. And also for employment, it also covers more than 71%. But there's some problem of this data. So one thing is about the sampling bias. It oversamples large firms. So we try to balance the data a little bit. Also, sometimes we try to restrict our sample to small firms, but still this can be seen as a limitation of this research. If you want to argue, so small firms are exposed more to the minimum wage changes.
There really are no small firms in this data set, right?
There are. So I have done a lot of statistics for that. Very few for non-state firms. Just like 2% of them are just a small firm. I say small firms which have less than 5 million China's yuan sales every year. So we call those small firms. Let's define them as small firms. So very few still are sampled in the survey, but very few. But for state firms, before 2005, actually, their percentage are kind of 5%, 6% every year. But compared to the 2004 census, you can see, so it's definitely significantly undersampled for small firms. I have some statistics in my paper about this. All right, so here I need a textbook model to pin down the variables I want to throw in the regression. Here, so first let's just look at the demand side first. And we can see, so here, following some basic setting, and labor demand can be pinned down just by the aggregated demand from characteristics and the market prices. Especially, so here if we assume there are 3 inputs, then we have the wage rate, the capital price, and the intermediate goods price. So here, if we wanted to account for labor demand, we just need to find proxies for those variables. And how about labor supply? This is a little bit hard because for firm-specific labor supply, it's hard to find a sort of proxy for that. So here, I want to consider some model which can be developed by using monopsony or efficiency wage or search model. It's just like when those frequency exists, then labor demand might not be equal to labor supply. So sometimes firm employment can be supply constrained, which means it's binding by labor supply, but there might be some excess labor demand. So in the sense that the firm still optimizes its employment. So this is still a textbook example, but so here the crucial parameter here is the elasticity of individual labor supply. But when the employment is constrained to supply, then the elasticity of labor supply is actually equal to the elasticity of wage or employment, which is we want to estimate. So here I want to find a proxy of labor supply elasticity. I'm not saying so this is equal to firm wage. I just want to argue here, if we control for demand side factors, then firm wage might measure a firm's, for example, monopsony power or something. So if a firm faces a higher elasticity of labor supply, it will offer comparatively higher firm wages. So from this point of view, firm wage can be sort of like a thing like a kind of imperfect proxy of labor supply elasticity. Okay. All right. So the main identification strategy is first, so the minimum wage policy is definitely not exogenous from the perspective of policy making. So the first strategy we have is try to control for minimum wage determinants, as many as possible, and we are going to show a table for minimum wage accounting. And here, so this is a benefit to use firm data. So if we assume firms do not observe more than us economists, so this just means, okay, so maybe this assumption is definitely strong, but you can see this as a benchmark assumption. So this means, so for minimum wage shocks that we cannot observe the source, then firms also do not observe that. So this will not change a firm's decision. So this can be as like a benchmark assumption. And also we use a panel data. Also we use a dynamic model because we argue so firm employment is definitely adjusted very slowly. So lagged employment account for a lot of firm-specific characteristics. It's important to control for that. And also we use this neighbor region approach actually was developed a long time ago. So here Carter-Kruger, you can see that as just one special case of that because it uses just one pair of neighbor states, Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So that's sort of just the same thing. And the Dube just use the whole country and it finds those counties across province border and try to use neighbor counties to control for time-varying unobservable factors. And also we use kind of subsamples before and after enforcement tightening to see how the minimum wage effect changes over time. And the heterogeneous effect, we either use separate groups or we just use interaction terms to estimate the result. This is the kind of the main framework we have, the estimation equation. The only thing new, I think, is this term. So I'm going to explain this one by one. So this is a firm level regression, and we have a one period lag dependent variable on the right hand side, and the C is county. So this is kind of minimum wage variable. We have here P denotes a county pair, a neighbor county pair. I will tell you how we constructed this sample. So, and the T denotes years. So those variables are very common. So we control for a lot of firm characteristics and the macroeconomic variables based on the kind of our basic theoretical framework. And we also focus on this key variable, annual minimum wages. And we control for firm fixed effect, year fixed effect, plus this county pair dummy by year fixed effect. This just means we use neighbor counties as kind of control groups.
So how do you decide what a neighboring county is since you're surrounded by other counties?
I will tell you later.
You guys doing it along a border, so at least there's a restricted set.
If two counties share same continuous border and their centroids are within 80 kilometers, we define them as neighbor counties. Because in China, some counties are so large, we just exclude them. Yeah, I will discuss this a little bit more later. And here, we also introduce some heterogeneous effects by enriching this kind of coefficient. So this is kind of a linear model for the coefficient, which means it depends on firm characteristics. So we can measure the heterogeneous response from this equation. So neighbor county pairs. Neighbor county, the intuition is very similar. So Card and Kruger is just like they use kind of one pair. And here we have a lot of pairs. We're going to stack them together to estimate the average treatment effect. And so here I choose the threshold to be 5%. So it's just because if I throw in all the neighbor county pairs, so a lot of neighbor counties have their minimum wages co-move all the time. So it's kind of sort of this variable then could be collinear with this county pair by year fixed effect. So here I need some variation between their minimum wages. So that's why I use kind of 5%. But I have other robustness checks with other threshold. And so here we identified then kind of 2,000 pairs in China. And one crucial thing is their locations, right? So if they are in different provinces, you might want to think, okay, they're kind of not similar, right? So in two provinces. So here actually we have all the county pairs, more than 80% located in the same province. So that's good news actually for us. And we have kind of results separately for those county pairs. Here, the main results focus on all the pairs. And also, you can see the size, also distributed mainly around 10%. But there are some extreme difference in minimum wage changes, more than 30%. County pairs have kind of a minimum wage change difference more than 15%. And here is a kind of visualization of those county pairs. But for the reduction of clustering, here only shows those pairs with more than 30% difference in their minimum wage hikes, in their minimum wage growth. So then you can see a lot of pairs are just straddling a province border because this kind of large difference in minimum wage growth can only happen between two provinces most of the time, right? But still, we can see some pairs within a province, especially in Liaoning, Guangdong, Hunan, right? But you can see a lot of pairs just across the border. This is more common for large difference hikes. All right. Here, our control variables just follow the theory, and we control for city level variables. So this we think it can account for some aggregate demand, and this account for living cost, and also industrial wage. Those are kind of proxies for firm wages, and those are price variables. Those are measures aggregate demand, industrial output, and here those are two parameters are very crucial for firm individual demand. For firm level variables, we think they account for a firm's individual labor supply, also account for individual demand. A lot of things, so especially ownership, profit margins, and the export to sales ratios. So here we use 1 year lag, their employment, and this sales just account for a firm size. And here are our main findings. So first, let's just account for minimum wage determinants. And let's see how minimum wage is determined. So in fact, in the law, there's a formula for that, right? So it depends on a couple of things, like 5 or 6 factors. And we just throw in a lot of macroeconomic variables to see which explain more the change in city minimum wages. Here you can see, so if we just use one variable, actually city average has an elasticity larger than 1. So it's quite highly correlated with city average. And here, so just like what Carl's did, so we also use a fixed asset investment because we believe this variable may be a proxy of a future growth potential, which might be concerned by local government officials, right? So because they don't want the minimum wage too high to damage a region's growth potential, right? So if the investment is high, so they're not worried about the future growth, so it's safe to raise the minimum wage. Okay, and the growth of GDP, so it's hard to explain this. This might not just indicate, okay, so if past growth is high, so maybe a region still wants to maintain a high growth rate, so they don't want to raise the minimum wage. But this is just one explanation for that. Here we have some local labor supply variables. They are not significant in this case. How about before enforcement tightening period? So here you can see, so it's negative and not significant. So this just implies that it's so not frequent to adjust minimum wages before 2004. So it's kind of was frozen over time. So for a lot of counties, they only adjusted minimum wages by 2 or 3 times before 2004. So it's very hard to account for minimum wages before the tightening period, you can see. And so our strategy is just, okay, so these variables are important. If we don't control them, there could be more endogeneity issues, so let's just control all of them. So here in the model. And here is the basic result for minimum wage elasticities. Let's first just use the whole sample and use interaction terms to see how the minimum wage effects change over time for every year in the sample. So, and you can see here, actually, the effect starts to be significant from 0 from 2003, actually. But the change from 2002 here, from negative 0.025 to negative 0.48 is not significant. However, 2004 doesn't give us a kind of negative change in the elasticity. Only starting from 2005, you can see the effect becomes very large. And 2006, there was a little bit reversal, but in 2007, so the result is quite similar here, right? So it's hard to explain this change, right, from 2002 to 2003. So we are not quite sure about that, but it's wise to just do more experimentations to see how it changes over time. So here first I'm gonna speed up a little bit, and here you can see we have this division, so the change is so large. But if we divide this period just using the year of 2004, it's a little bit, they both shrink a little bit. So here we just stick to this kind of pre and post tightening division here. And here we use, let's see, okay, so here, let's look at the effect of other variables, right? And you can see here, for other variables, the explanatory power doesn't seem to surpass this minimum wage variable here, right? For those regional variables. However, for firm-owned characteristics, they are quite highly correlated with its employment level, and the signs are mostly consistent with the model. And here I show the difference between whether to control neighbor county pair dummies or not. So if we control that, we have kind of much more negative results, right? So if we don't control neighbor county pairs, okay, it's still negative and sort of significant at the 5% level, but it's much negative. If you can think of some missing variables which are both positively related to the minimum wage and positively related to firm employment, then it will bias the result upward. So this might just suggest, okay, so the control of neighbor county pairs can account for such factors to some extent. Oh, sorry. So here, let's just analyze the channel a bit. If a firm's employment declines, so there gotta be some channel. It should be the firm wage. If the firm wage does not change according to the minimum wage, how can the minimum wage affect a firm's employment? So you can see, so the result is quite large. So of course, other wage variables still show very large coefficient, but you know, firm wage tracks the minimum wage quite closely here. And so we use like a lagged firm wage as a kind of heterogeneous groups to see their responses to the minimum wage actually. So here it shows a monotone pattern here, and for the wage group with the bottom wage, it shows a much more negative elasticity to the minimum wage, but for the top group, it's just not significant anymore. How about before period? It's very interesting to see some significantly positive effect, and if you look at this graph, right? So here, so the pattern still remains, but the overall effect just declines here. And we use interaction terms because we want to control for other demand factors to see if this can account for more about the heterogeneity. But before period, now it becomes insignificantly positive. And we have also other robustness checks by using different thresholds to identify neighbor county pairs. We also want to see if the minimum wage affects firm exit, but we haven't found much evidence for that. We also shift the treatment back for 1 year. So assuming there's no expectation effect, actually there's no, so the elasticity is positive now and not significant. So, okay, so our finding is just like the minimum wage policy leads firms to reduce their employment, but we still don't have evidence about those displaced workers. So, and I think like Professor Lee and Carl, their research can contribute to this. So, I mean, the minimum wage policy raised the wage rate for poorly paid workers and reduced firm employment, but still, if the government can create other opportunities for them, like a service sector or something, so this might not be bad for them. And also the government plays an important role here if the enforcement tightening result is true, so the kind of law regulation just amplified the result, so it works. Okay, so we have some research in progress. Yeah, first, like heterogeneity across regions. also, we try to uncover the compliance from the UHS data and to combine that with this research. All right, so this is a whole for this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so this is Xinjiang from Tsinghua and visiting CUHK.
Firstly, I'd like to thank here. And here's my actually the paper I read is a little bit different from what you read. So so let me briefly summarize the paper. The research question of this paper is what's the impact of minimum wage on the employment in China? And they also use three sources of data. One is manufacturing firms. The other one is the county level minimum wage data, and then the macro data is in the city level. And then the main empirical strategy they use is a per county approach. And they have two main findings. The first one is the minimum wage has a significant negative effects on the employment, especially after 2004 when the enforcement of the minimum wage was strengthened. And then the heterogeneous effect exists. And I actually have some comments and questions. The first comment is on the theory, because the authors mainly derive the labor demand function, which is the base of the empirical specification. However, as we know, any observed employment, even it is in a firm level, is an equilibrium outcome, meaning that it is determined by the demand and supply. So in the empirical study, it's better to include variables representing labor supply, because these variables might be correlated with minimum wage and also affect the firm level employment, causing an endogenous problem. And the second thing is that I'm kind of confused by this labor demand function. And it seems to me that the authors are discussing the relationship between wage level but not the minimum wage and the labor demand. So it seems to me that it only applies to a case when the minimum wage is binding. So it is better to state it clear in the paper than this is. The second thing I'm a little bit confused is that I have thought about this for a long time, but I kind of don't understand what's the intuition of this labor demand, because we have wage here in the numerator and also a wage here in the denominator. So when the wage increases, seems to me that the effect is like counting with each other. So what's the intuition underlying these effects of wage and the labor demand in the function they derive? So a small point is that sigma is defined in the appendix but not in the main text, which is here. So it's just a small point. So for me, actually, I think the toy model could be enough. Like when the minimum wage is not binding, then there is no effect. When the minimum wage is binding, there is a negative effect. So on average, depending on the fraction of firms affected by the minimum wage, there might be some negative effects on average. So, and I also have some comments on the empirical study. I think the way to construct a neighbor pair is a bit strange to me, because the authors use this formula to define pair. For example, like county A and county B is a pair if the growth rate of minimum wage is larger than a threshold. But in the paper, the authors also argue that the minimum wage are determined by many county level variables. So if we have two counties having very different growth rate of the minimum wage, can we still think these counties are compared to each other, meaning that one is treatment, the other one is control? So this is actually really confusing to me. And the second thing I'm a little bit confused is the empirical specification. In the paper, the authors do the first difference and then get this regression function. And a typo is that in the regression function there is no minimum wage, but maybe they have corrected this typo. And I kind of don't understand how this specification identify the effects of minimum wage. Actually, this is a question, but not a comment. I kind of don't understand how they identify the the effects. So maybe the authors can answer the question. And also the second thing is that because according to their definition, the neighbor pair change every year. So I'm also kind of a little bit confused how they do the first difference of the firm, because one firm might appear many times in the data. So this is one confusion. And the authors also argue that by including many variables significantly affecting minimum wage in the regression can solve the endogenous problem. But I think this could not be enough because these variables are included in the regression linearly. But the policymaker might make the decision using some like nonlinear formula. So it could be misspecified. Additionally, they include very few supply side variables. And the second thing which confused me is that because according to my understanding, the main variation the authors use comes from cross-county variations, but the authors investigate the determinant of minimum wage in the city level, which is presented in section 6.1, and also they control the city level variables in the regression. So I was wondering why don't they just use the city level minimum wage to do some like a cross-city comparison? So I'm kind of confused why they claim that the variation comes from the county level variation, but when they investigate the source of this variation, they use many city level variable to explain such kind of a county level variation. So I'm kind of confused. There are also some minor comments in the figure 2 and 3. They show the relative minimum wage to average wage, but I think it's better to present a figure showing the minimum wage, the level minimum wage, but not the relative minimum wage over time across county, which help us to understand the variation. And the second thing is a very minor point. They also mentioned that they use a provincial CPI to adjust different living costs in different regions. By using, as we know, the CPI cannot adjust the different living costs across different regions at a given time point. So they might want to refer to this paper. They provide a spatial deflator. They actually construct the spatial deflator to adjust the cross-region living costs. And the second, and then the third minor point is that in the second page of in the second paragraph on page 12, the author said that starting firm level employment only requires such control for equilibrium outcome in the market, thus we do not need to consider a large sum of intangible set of demand side and supply side factor at the aggregate level. I'm kind of confusing because first one is that what's the equilibrium outcome refer to? I think they refer to the equilibrium wage and equilibrium employment, but I think the equilibrium outcome is always determined by the demand and supply. So why, I don't understand why the authors think they do not need to consider demand side and supply side factors. So it's kind of confusing to me. So these are all my comments and questions.